Thank you, Jonathan. We will conduct this session in Hebrew, so those who need the earphones, please put them on. Rav-Aluf b'miluim.
General in Reserves, Bogie, right? It's not Boogie. It's important to say it's Bogie, not Boogie. Before we begin our conversation, we dedicated this session in memory of Yigal Ragunis. We usually, in the international conference, to honor the memory of a few figures, key figures, who didn't just talk about fighting terror, but actually dealt with it and contributed a lot to prevent terror and to defend the people of Israel. And Yigal Ragunis is definitely such a figure. And maybe you can just say a few words in his memory, if you can. First of all, good evening. Thank you for inviting me to be in this important international conference, and to say thank you, Boaz, for you for having established with your own hands the ICT, which has become an international center of know-how. Captain Eyal Ragunis was an officer in this elite unit. I met him when he was still corporal. I was in the paratroopers, he was in the intelligence. And then I realized how his traits, he's a thinking, curious person, non-conformist. He said what he thinks. He is not afraid to say what he wants to think about. I followed him when I got the command on this unit. I said, I'm not taking anybody else except Eyal. He already was discharged. He was an architect. I courted him, and finally he came to our unit, and I wasn't sorry. One of the things that people know about in the intelligence was the attack against Abu Jihad. And this is one of the examples how much important is the intelligence of very small details, and to say it to the commander so that you can do things without any mishaps. In that respect, really, he was an intelligent officer, the ultimate intelligence officer. May his memory be blessed. Thank you. And I think that very few people who throughout the history of the State of Israel dealt with various aspects of combating terror, as you did in many of your posts in the IDF, until you became the Chief of Staff of the IDF, and then later on also the Minister of Defense. You are a politician, but you're a security person. And therefore, for us, as researchers of terror, people who come from all over the world, it's important for us to understand the dilemma, the difficulties, and the challenges that are facing the decision makers. I want to start by asking, which is on the border of current politics, can you describe to us the challenges facing the State of Israel? You know, some people say that what happens in a normal state in a year happens in the State of Israel in a day. So if we just look at the last few days, we see bombing of a unit that wants to launch drones into Israel from Syria. We see drones that the Hezbollah say that they're Israeli, and then they attack an army-sensitive base, and then we bomb them, and we see bombing in the border of Syria and Iraq that are said to be Israelis, although we don't take responsibility. We hear that the Prime Minister convenes in another few minutes a press release of sort regarding the Iranian nuclear. All this, in a normal state, can take time, a long time. Here it takes no time. Maybe you can give us some orders. What are the security challenges that Israel has to face? Or maybe even give us a grade for the government. First of all, as a strategic distinction, I would say that we are still fighting our war of liberation. And another strategic thing is we are dragged by factors in the area that do not recognize our state as the state of the Jewish people. The good news is that there is no existential threat at the moment. You know, in 48 and 67, and we attacked and we defeated them. 73 was the real test at the time, conventional, and they came to the conclusion they have no chance to win over the IDF. Some of them did not give up, sometimes with agreements. Hussein was the beginner in that, and then Sadat of Egypt. Those who did not accept our existence and didn't want to have any relations went to two kinds of threats. One is the non-conventional threat, whether it is the trial to acquire nuclear, Saddam Hussein or Assad, and then Iran, and others went to the sub-conventional, whether it was terror or if it was rockets. But what typifies these two threats on the state of Israel is their thought that they cannot cope with the army, let's attack civilians. And what happens is not the military force. You have to have military force. You have to use it. But in what battle in the last few years did we exert the force of the IDF? What is now tested is the capability of the civilians to cope. If we deal with combating terror, first of all, we have to make sure that the resilience of the public is strong and that the public does not give up. Anybody who gives in to terror, then it's too bad. On the other hand, it creates capabilities that push away the threats, whether it's the Hamas getting stronger. At the time, the Iranians used to smuggle arms to Gaza, and then it took 5 years, and then now they cannot do it. This is intelligence capability, not to enable them to get it. In the meantime, they're creating the knowledge by themselves. But when we deal with this threat, it starts from knifing of lone wolves who now can make a decision because of incitement. They're incited against us. Hatred, anti-Semitism, the Temple Mount, which is a fuel to incitement. Anybody can take a knife, anybody can take a car and to run over. This is a primitive instrument. It's very difficult to cope with. It started September 2015. There were a lot of difficulties how to cope with it. How do you pre-locate them? You go into the web. Anybody with a potential, how do you avoid it? But at the end of the day, even forces that are deployed in order to prevent any damage. Then those who are more organized, maybe shooting, and then mortar shells, and then Hamastan in Gaza. They have capabilities to launch rockets or drones, like they did last week against one of our vehicles. Maybe they have capability of different kind of drones up to Hezbollah in the north. And this is like an army. It's an army, some of it guerrilla. It's equipped with rockets. They try to launch them. And now Shiite militias. But when you look today at this area, you understand that the focus for all these terrorist organizations today is in Tehran. And this didn't exist in the past. Tehran, because it finances the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. And also it arms Hezbollah and those Shiite militias in Syria that are threatening us. And therefore, the end of the day, the focus, no doubt, is Iran. It became the factor that challenges not just us, also the Houthis against the Saudi Arabians and Iraq. And then, as a leadership, you have to understand, first of all, that Iran is the problem. You have to see how to deal with it, in what means, and then their arms, their tentacles, so that you have to understand the damage on a daily basis, or if it's another battle. And if you have another battle, you have to win in such a way that the other side says, it's not worth my while. I am not going to escalate. And the best examples in the last few years is the Hamas in Gaza. Because of the blow it was dealt a few years ago, it's a complete quiet as far as they're concerned. They didn't shoot one bullet. And if somebody else did, then he was the address to deal with it. And of course, if we look at the long term, we're talking about a nuclear threat. And therefore, the government has to look at it in the multi-asset facet of it. You are in the opposition today. And all in all, I take the checklist of everything that you said, and I think that the government has to get a good grade. The government doesn't just sit idle. If we relate to Israel, everything that people relate to it and all the responsibility, plus what Israel took upon itself, all in all, we managed quite a bit to cut the capabilities of our various opponents and to maintain a certain level of relative quiet, at least for the home front in Israel. First of all, I cannot give a low grade because it's a policy that I initiated. Second, if my comments in the military arena, I give a high grade, but my comments go to politics. We used to take a vague policy, and the others can think who did it or not. But if you don't take responsibility, you don't challenge. So you are criticizing the change in the Israeli policy of taking responsibility for activities in Syria. The moment you take responsibility, then the other side has to respond. They know that we attacked. They knew who attacked even in the past, and we knew that they knew. You get the deterrence because they know exactly who attacked them. With our capability, those rebels, they don't have our capabilities. So I was critical in the elections, in the politics. You know, people wanted to be arrogant and to show off, but it's superfluous because what happened recently with the Hezbollah in Lebanon derives from the fact that we took a responsibility, not from anything else. In the Gaza Strip, I'm critical since April of last year. Until April of last year, the policy was very clear. As I said, the Hamas didn't shoot one bullet. And since last year, the Hamas started to challenge us with very simple tools. They didn't even mean for it to become so effective. The kites with explosive types with the Molotov cocktail that started igniting our fields. And all of a sudden, it becomes, instead of taking and doing something immediately to the other side, no, I said, well, it's only kites, it's only fires, it's only burning bushes. And this was the beginning for the decline. And I said it in real time. If you don't respond to disturbance of your sovereignty by a kite, eventually you're going to get rockets. And in the last few years, we have mortars, we have drones, and that brings me to the question of policy. Not to every means the IDF or the state has to give a direct response. You see a kite, to hit a balloon, and even rockets. When the Hezbollah from Lebanon shoots, and they have thousands of Katyushas, you cannot target every launcher. And therefore, you have to take the price from the other side. When you fight terror, you have to put the other side with a dilemma. Is it worthwhile continuing or not? And so that it won't be worthwhile for them to continue, then you collect the price. It can be just maybe targeting a few people, or maybe jeopardizing its interests in assets or anything, or maybe the camps or printing houses. And instead of struggling directly with the volume, and the other side should know it's not worth their while. I want to expand and talk about more challenging things. You spoke about the Iranian challenge. You talked about the head of the octopus with its tentacles. And in this, I don't want to talk about the Israeli policy. What about the American one? We see that President Trump changed his policy if we compare it to Obama. he decided to push out the deal, and he continues to do things with Iran, and we see achievements as far as jeopardizing the Iranian economy and its implications on Iran's capabilities to finance terror in various countries. But we're beginning to hear all sorts of nuances that remind us a little bit of the approach of Trump to Kim Jong-il in Korea. He would be happy to speak to the Iranians, and he's ready to sit and negotiate. What is he going to negotiate? Should he negotiate? And if yes, what should be the American objectives in this negotiation? There's a little similarity between North Korea and the Iranian regime. I'm talking about the Iranian regime. Although it is apocalyptic, it's messianic, at the end of the day, when it has to do with its survival, they're rational. They proved it. In 2003, after the United States attacked Iraq, the leaders in the Middle East said to themselves, just a minute, maybe I'll be the target now. The first one in the offensive of the United States after 9/11 was Afghanistan, second Iraq, and who's the next target? And they said Gaddafi in Libya. He gave up his nuclear without one bullet. Khamenei created the project. 2003, he stopped it for a year and a half. When did he renew it? When he realized that the internal dispute in Washington causes the fact that the United States is not going to go to the third phase. So he renewed his project. The next time that Khamenei, the same leader, made a decision to come kneeling to the negotiating table was 2012. The United States took policy which is combined political isolation of the regime, crippling sanctions, threatening with military force, sometimes the Israeli force or the American one on the table, under the table, and the great Iranian fear today is derived from these pressures. Bad economy, military threat, and the fear that there will be an internal rebellion. So after they had that opportunity, they came on their knees to the negotiating table, and we were very critical again. Finally, they wrote a deal. We said it was an historical mistake with great concessions of the United States. And the Iranians were very happy. So when Trump changed his policy, and he conveyed resilience, determination. He said, I'm not going to say, don't ignore the fact that Iran is violating the resolutions of the Security Council, the missile project that Obama signed, and I exert sanctions. And these sanctions work. They work even now, even today. These sanctions can bring the Iranian leadership to the negotiating table. And now there's a question, what does America convey? So there were a few test cases here that should make us worry. Let's ask it in a different way. If you come to the negotiating table, what is the recommendation of the Israeli former security the defense ministry to the President Trump? What should be the pillars of the New Deal? With what we started. Why do they need centrifuges? For what? It's obvious today that it's a military nuclear project. Before the Mossad even brought the archives, we've been saying it since the 90s. If it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. I was in a few places as a minister when I had to convince a few leaders to give them, here, there's the evidence. And they were convinced. And of course that has implications. You have to stop Iran any independent capability. That's what they insist on in missiles and also the enrichment of uranium. Uranium is the critical thing, not the plutonium. Unfortunately, the deal signed by Obama enables them to do it. Now, in order to show the world they use better centrifuges, more enrichment, bigger quantities. This should have disappeared. They don't need it for energy. The Russians also offer them, fine, we'll give you the materials. And so there's an issue here that has to be very clear. No production independently. The other thing, this is the strait that actually challenges all the Sunni regimes in the area as well as Israel, and it's impossible. And they have a terror infrastructure in 5 continents: North America, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, of course. How come? Since the intelligence exists, the intelligence of transferring arms from Iran to Yemen. We can give you the evidence. Why? How can they do it? So we have to have American determination here in all these issues to continue to pressure the Iranian regime economically, because they make the account, like in 2012, when the economists came to Khamenei, said, unless we do away with the sanctions, we won't survive. That's where he has to be brought to. But determination has to be all over without giving in. And I think that at the end of the day, when this regime will have the dilemma whether to continue, especially in the nuclear, or to survive, they will choose survival. You see this American determination, because I look at what's happening in the Middle East. It started, of course, quite strongly with Obama, but even Trump. We see the American idleness. We see the lack of willingness to put the money where the mouth is. We see the deals that done. We just now heard about mutual tours with the Turks. We see that there's a new sheriff in the Middle East, and he's not American, he's Russian. Well, it's still not a Russian sheriff, although it's a significant player. I say that they're less good as than the Americans on the ball court. But the Americans haven't got the willingness to confront. The moment you're not willing to confront, then you have a problem. Now, if you want peace, you have to call for war. So if I come to Khamenei and I send a drone and I attacked American interests in the Middle East, let's say oil wells. Something happened to his microphone. The Hormuz Straits, or attacking containers in Fujairah. The Americans convey lack of willingness to cope, and here we have a problem. I think the Iranians, and I know them very well, they identify weakness, and that's bad. If you want to bring the Iranians to the table, the economic pressure has to continue. You have to convey determination, political stomach you must have in order to cope with it. Otherwise, the Iranians can identify weakness very easily, and they will not go into negotiations. I'm not sure where it's going to get us. Bogie, our time is up, and I want to thank you wholeheartedly for having come here in order to share your thoughts with us. It's very important to listen to you. You're always a very welcome guest in this place.